Hi, it's Mike here from TwoDads. Thank you for joining us again. Here we have another episode which is related to supporting those through COVID-19 that are either trying to conceive or on a fertility journey themselves. So I'm delighted today to be joined by not only a friend, but an incredible professional by the name of Andrew Spearman, who is from Laytons. For those of you that don't know Andrew, he's one of the leading experts in surrogacy law for England and Wales, helping couples and individuals completely navigate their way through parenthood. He's regularly in the High Courts to help ensuring that the journey runs as smooth as possible. In addition, he advises domestic and international organisations, charities and government departments on surrogacy law in the UK to, I guess, advance understanding and support in that particular sector. While science has moved forward, the law lags a little behind, and Andrew remains one of the biggest advocates for change. Andrew, how the devil are you?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you very much. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. Not too bad at all. Not
Good.
too bad at all. Lovely to see you again.
Thank you very much. In strange times and strange environments.
I know, right? It's just bizarre. But thank you for joining us today. So similar format to the ones that we've done before. We have a number of questions to run through, and those questions then will allow our expert to also put through some of their top tips for advising both couples and individuals that are on this particular journey that might have anxieties around the topic that you're going to talk about today. For those watching as well, links to both Andrew's email address and to Layton's in particular will all be in the comments below. So let's start with the first question then. As we mentioned, it's completely uncharted territories at the moment, which naturally is stress-inducing for all of us and any one of us at the best times. But for those trying to conceive, or those that are pregnant, or those that are imminently due, that are on a particular journey abroad, more so, I'm assuming. What's your experience of the current situation? What's keeping you busy?
Lots of things keeping me busy. But in the short term, it's those obviously with babies that are due on a very short period. There is nothing, not even COVID, will stop when a baby is due to be born, and we must all therefore react obviously appropriately. In some ways, most of my advice and most of my structure is usually in the sort of short term, that those kind of babies that are coming, those which are in the medium term, those who are already pregnant or on the process of that, and looking for advice on the impact and changes there, and much longer term planning. And obviously for those in the medium or long term, I'm always strongly encouraging them just to continue as they would, if possible. Obviously, different organisations, different clinics that I know your other guests have spoken about will be taking different actions and different precautions to still allow us all to live a life as much as closely as possible as we can. But for those in the short term and those with impending pregnancies, excruciatingly stressful. And I have a lot of sympathy and empathy with those couples that are going through it. You can't begin to imagine, not only with dealing with, well, I'm speaking to the wrong person, you can definitely imagine the stress that you go through with anticipating the birth twice. But nonetheless, you doing it on an international field and not knowing if you're able to get there, the stress of immigration is already a bit of a handful, casting your luggage loads of equipment and then only to find that you hit a wall of bureaucracy on the other side. It's unfortunately uncharted, which means everything must be taken as a moving feast, really. But anything that we can do to help, I'm always very happy to do so.
And what appears to be the most common issue presently, and how can that be overcome or better prepared for? What are you hearing that's quite common at the minute?
Yeah, I mean, there's two that automatically spring to mind, and one is something that I know we'll probably go on to speak about, but the most obvious one is the ability to travel, and in there it becomes a international moving feast instead. For most of the time, obviously, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office guidance is obviously not to travel unless absolutely necessary. It will be unsurprising for most of us to learn that that includes a child being born, and obviously a child domestically is a vulnerable person, so obviously the purpose for travel is justified. When you then hit the foreign side to it, when you hit other jurisdictions and other decision makers, though, you must take that into account. Not only just getting on the plane here, but being able to get into the country the other side. Obviously, the most common destinations, the US, Canada, Ukraine, Georgia, those kind of destinations are familiar with surrogacy arrangements. They have their own policies in place for them to ensure that those, while not entirely smooth, are able to enter, and you are funneled through, for example, still one of the 13, I believe it's 13 airports in the US for traveling in, and then you're hitting their level of bureaucracy. For couples who are going on a second journey, you may find it slightly easier, actually, because if you've done the journey already in the US before, then one of your children already has US nationality by default. And that actually allows you one of the entries into it as well. The problem comes, obviously, that the child that's due to be born will, in the US, for example, have US nationality. But will the US then extend that right to you? And how does that jurisdiction and that state that the child's been born in recognize you? And that applies to each of the jurisdictions. The rather lawyer answer in me, I'm afraid you can all inwardly cringe as I give it, but the lawyer answer within me is always you need to seek advice and legal advice from that jurisdiction. So obviously some of the other contemporaries that will be on your show, Mike, will be discussing those elements in those jurisdictions as well, and pay real attention to that advice. And each state in the US will be different. Canada will be different again. Ukraine will be different again. And getting there. Now, obviously, then you're there, happy days, or maybe you're already there, and it's actually coming back. We've seen a few stories in the news recently about couples who get stranded, essentially, and then struggle to come back. Again, clear lines of communication with the Home Office, real pressure being brought onto them, both by newspapers, by lawyers like me, throwing them up and heckling them to get it through. A lot depends on the parentage. For those of you who have looked into surrogacy in particular, you'll know that the legal parenthood in England and Wales is very different to other jurisdictions in the fact that we don't gift it automatically to the intended parents, and we don't automatically recognise the foreign orders. So your legal parenthood for British nationality is going to be different to that in the other jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you sometimes forget that each state will run to their own set of regulations as well, and that's just another layer of complexities, I guess. So travel bans then, which we've just touched on, it appears to be an issue for the foreseeable. There are, I think you mentioned 13 airports still open in the US, which I still find surprising, but hey ho. But how, is guardianship the key to safeguarding that particular journey or child in terms of a protection point of view? Is that something that's quite common?
Well, you can probably imagine it's something that wasn't meant to be common until this process came around. I would say, obviously, in the natural hierarchy, there's nothing and no substitute for the intended parents being there. I mean, that obviously must be something that people try with all their might. I'm not saying for a second that people wouldn't, but that is obviously something that will have a lot of force with the immigration officials as well for going and collecting a child that is being born. Mm-hmm. The secondary options, usually you'll find a lot of secondary options within the contract that certainly international surrogacy arrangements, the contractual arrangements will govern the guardianship, and those that if the intended parents can't be there, who will look after the child. So that would be something, again, to speak to the lawyer in that jurisdiction about. Yeah. Sometimes some of those guardians are appointed because actually they foresee a fatality in the intended parents rather than actually just an inability to turn up. Yeah. So sometimes those people are here and they're going to face exactly the same issues, if not worse, than the intended parents would for that purpose as well. In those circumstances, for those who are a bit further out than, for example, a week or two, which would be a little bit more panic, but for those that are a bit further out and still urgent, then you would normally seek to coordinate with your surrogate, with your foreign lawyer, with your UK lawyer as well, to prepare the relevant authorities for a form of guardianship to take place instead. The guardianship taking effect in the foreign jurisdiction, but needing to be recognised everywhere for the purposes of travel as well, so that perhaps the guardian who takes temporary care of the child can then come to the UK, depending on what, again, the relations are with the UK and that foreign state. But having that paperwork prepared, having it executed properly, and having it duly then and securely sent across to the state to be used takes, obviously, unfortunately, some time to do. The forms themselves aren't necessarily complicated, but they do usually require the wet signatures on it, rather than our usual, internet and electronic work that I certainly work on. So it is a step change. It's not uncharted territory, because obviously guardianship and parental rights extend out to those who aren't the default parents isn't unusual. But in a situation like this, I think we all have to adapt, and we all have to find perhaps imperfect solutions, while we hope that this can be over as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you. So then, I guess, following on, really, immigration and government bodies abroad. So I guess where some of the challenges have been, and where you're probably spending a lot of your time speaking to these particular individuals. Is there any additional guidance to UK intended parents in terms of the correct travel documents to obtain, or how they're meant to leave the country to come back to the UK? I'm sure it's a moving piece that's changing daily. But what's what's happening currently, and how are IPs finding themselves abroad versus a regular international journey?
Yes, definitely from the start, I would say it is, if anything else, a moving feast for the Home Office and the challenges that they're facing on it. And while I don't necessarily agree with every outcome that they've been trying to project, at least they are moving at a relatively swift pace than I'd expect. To give them their due, they are putting their back into it. But that said and done, it's still not perfect. And each country, again, the most common route, certainly, again, I use the example of the US because it's quite prevalent, is that the US nationality would be gifted to the child, and the child will usually travel back on that passport for ease until the parental order is granted, and then we obtain the British nationality on that. The problem, obviously, with the US closing the US passport causes a lot of problems, and when as other jurisdictions do a similar trick, or conversely, for example, if you go to Ukraine where the child is not entitled to Ukrainian nationality, then you must fall back onto the British side. And here, emergency travel documentation would be the obvious choice, but that still takes months to get usually, and for that to be hammered through, and for there to be no illicit, or somebody perhaps being a little bit more with more malign intentions, should I say, in fairness. That's what they're on the lookout for, and trying to prove that you're not, and show that history and show the authenticity of the child, which usually takes some considerable time. Again, normally the reason people don't do it. And obtaining the authentic British passport and nationality. I mentioned earlier, though, that if your child is born to a surrogate who's unmarried, then the party with the other party who will be recognised as a legal parent, if it's a man anyway, you can usually apply under the normal rules for that passport, and again, still takes time, but is not an emergency document, and it is regularising it in the proper and right way. But where your surrogate's married, the surrogate and a husband or wife are the legal parents as far as English law is concerned. So the ability to pass down the British nationality usually hinges on the parental order being granted, certainly without having to do some quite significant jiggery-pokery. And that's a legal terminology right there, jiggery-pokery. And so you're back into that murky territory of emergency travel documents. Nobody wants to be in any other country for any longer, than they have to be. But I think my advice to most couples who are imminently going to be giving birth is to really look at the strong likelihood that you're going to be there for much longer than you anticipated, and consider actually then the flip side. And again, like a broken record, speaking to the local lawyer, because you run a risk of your own immigration being overextended. Some countries are quite strict, others a bit better. Make sure you're familiar with the domestic immigration laws for you, not just your child, and the approach that you're trying to achieve.
Amazing, thank you. So before we close then, can you give me your top tips or a roundup of the must-haves, must-dos in an international arrangement during COVID?
Sure. I mean, it will come as no surprise again that my tips for my clients are always preparation, preparation, preparation. You can't beat it. You all will have done it when you engaged in the process for the surrogacy arrangement. You researched it thoroughly. You went to these places. You met people. You talked to people. You gathered as much information as possible. Don't just believe the first thing off the bat. You know, look into it, look around it, and look for the solutions. They are there. But if you have any more than a few weeks out, you really need to get on it as well for preparing and preparing the documents fully and properly, so that if you have to fall to plan B, they're there and ready. You're not having to then scoot like a headless chicken trying to run around to get everything. It's not fair, and it's not right for you or for the surrogate to be stranded with that obligation. And the only other bit I say to people as well is, obviously, getting there and back is important, but don't lose sight of the end goal. We're there to get your legal parenthood through. The courts are behind you here in the UK when you come back. There is nothing that's going to undermine that in the short or long term. And so the logistical issue that you have, let that be just that. Don't let it blow it up into something more that we're not going to recognise you ever as legal parents. It's all going to fall apart. It is keep your eyes on the prize. And if it costs a little bit more money and you have to justify where those expenses are for those reasonable expenses, it's money well worth spent, in my view.
No, agreed. I'm sure there are people that are going to really take comfort and advice in that. So if people want to get hold of you, Andrew, just give us your email address again, please.
Yeah, sure. It's very simple. It's just andrew.spearman and at laytons.com.
Perfect. Andrew, you've been a gent. Thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Take it easy.
Bye.
Bye.